My husband cheated with his ex for a year behind my back, so I legally stole his only child. I was 21 when I met David at a grief support group where we both sat in metal folding chairs week after week. His wife had died during childbirth 6 months earlier, and I'd just lost my best friend to a hammered driver who walked away without a scratch. We were two broken people who couldn't stop waking up and forgetting our losses, then remembering all over again like a punch to the gut. David had baby Jay, who was this tiny thing that would never know his mother, and I had a gaping hole where my best friend used to be, so we naturally became each other's lifelines. For 2 years, we stayed just friends. I'd show up after work to help with Jay while David stared at walls like they held answers. He tried dating, and there was this veterinarian named Claire who stuck around for 8 months and tried her best, but Jay would wail whenever she held him because babies know things we don't, and eventually Claire gave up competing with a ghost. Then David looked at me, really looked at me for the first time, not just as the helpful girl who knew Jay's bedtime routine. 4 months later, we were married, his dead wife's parents sobbing happy tears in the front row, her mom hugging me extra tight that day. "She would have liked you," she whispered, "if only she knew." By the time Jay turned 3, he was calling me mommy, not stepmom or my name, but just mommy. God, that word coming from his little mouth could have powered the sun. When nightmares came, he'd crawl into our bed and wrap those tiny arms around my neck and squeeze until I couldn't breathe, but I never wanted him to let go. I knew every quirk, like how he hated carrots unless I made airplane noises, and how he needed his dinosaur song exactly 3 times before sleep and only wore the green socks on Tuesdays. That beautiful boy was mine in every way that mattered. Then our perfect family shattered like cheap glass. Jay had just turned 6 when I was looking for his school schedule on David's iPad and found texts that made my blood turn to ice. Claire was back. The same veterinarian from before had been meeting him for a year behind all those working late nights and client dinners I'd believed. Apparently he'd gotten pregnant and lost the baby 3 months in. Their messages even mapped out their future together, but one phrase hit me like a sledgehammer. I was just convenient childcare. 3 years of being Jay's mother, and that's all I was to David. A live-in nanny he could screw whenever he wanted. That night, I tucked Jay in same as always and kissed his forehead and sang about dinosaurs. Then I walked into our bedroom where David was reading like he hadn't just destroyed everything. The confrontation was pathetic. He sobbed harder than I'd ever seen with actual snot and tears. He said he was lost and confused and still grieving his first wife after 6 years. Claire made him feel alive, but losing their baby showed him his mistake. He actually got on his knees and begged me to think of Jay, so I forgave him. At least, that's what I let him think. 4 years of Oscar-worthy performance followed. I smiled at dinner and laughed at his jokes and screwed him twice a week on schedule. But while he slept, I was planning. I made copies of every text and every receipt, including the engagement ring he'd bought Claire that cost 3 times mine. I started having coffee with his dead wife's parents every week. Patricia would cry about her daughter while I held her hand. They loved me for loving their grandson, and I honestly loved them back. The trap was elegant. 4 years of perfect performance led to this moment. At our vow renewal, surrounded by white roses with Jay in a tuxedo as ring bearer, I asked David if I could officially adopt Jay. My voice broke at just the right moment. In front of everyone, his colleagues, his dead wife's parents, he cried actual tears and announced I was Jay's real mother anyway. Patricia sobbed with joy. The judge made it official the next morning while David signed every paper without reading a word, still glowing from our perfect renewal. Then 24 hours later, I had him served at his office. The screaming was so loud his assistant ran out, but I stayed ice-cold calm and explained the custody arrangement. Equal rights now. Very fair and very legal. You should have read what you signed, I said softly. Patricia and Robert know about Claire, about the engagement ring, about everything. I watched reality crash into him like a physical blow. He'd just given me legal rights to Jay, the only good thing in his life, and he'd handed him over while playing happy family at our fake renewal. The lawyers say you get visitation every other weekend, I said, heading for the door. Standard arrangement. The sound David made wasn't human. It was something dying. I turned at the door. Funny thing about grief support groups. I actually started going 3 months before your wife died. She went to the same group. His face went white as paper. Sarah talked about you constantly. How you were never home. How you made her feel invisible. I paused. We became very close, Sarah and I. Best friends, actually. Such a shame about that pregnancy complication. So sudden. David's coffee mug shattered against his office floor, ceramic shards scattering across the polished wood. The dark liquid spread in an expanding puddle that matched the horror spreading across his face. I stepped carefully over the mess, my heels clicking with measured precision as I reached into my purse and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I placed Patricia's phone number on his desk, smoothing out the creases with deliberate care. My voice remained steady, almost conversational. I explained that she was expecting his call about Jay's pickup arrangements for today. The science fair was tomorrow, after all, and someone needed to help with setup tonight. His hands trembled as he reached for the paper, then jerked back as if it might burn him. The color had drained from his face entirely now, leaving him gray and waxy under the fluorescent office lights. His mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. Behind him, through the glass wall of his office, I could see his assistant hovering nervously, clearly debating whether to intervene. I glanced at my watch. School pickup was in 45 minutes. Jay would be waiting with his volcano project, excited about tomorrow's science fair. I gathered my purse and turned toward the door, pausing only to remind David that Ms. Martinez preferred punctual parents. The drive to Jay's school took 23 minutes in afternoon traffic. I arrived at the pickup line to find David's silver sedan already there, 3 cars ahead of me. Through his rear window, I could see his shoulders shaking. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles had turned white. When the line moved forward, he fumbled with his seatbelt for so long that the car behind him honked. Other parents had started to notice. Mrs. Chen in the mini minivan next to me kept glancing between our cars, her expression growing increasingly concerned. The Hendersons, walking their twins to their car, slowed their pace to stare. By the time the school doors opened and children began streaming out, a small crowd of parents had gathered near the fence, their whispered conversations creating a low buzz of speculation. Jay burst through the doors carrying his volcano project, his backpack bouncing against his shoulders with each enthusiastic step. His face lit up when he spotted both our cars, and he waved frantically, nearly dropping his science project in the process. The pure joy on his face made my chest tighten. He had no idea his world was about to shift beneath his feet. David stumbled out of his car when Jay approached, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. He dropped his keys twice trying to open the back door for Jay's project. His hands shook so badly he couldn't manage the simple task. Jay's excited chatter about tomorrow's science fair faltered as he watched his father struggle with the door handle. I stepped out of my car and walked over, maintaining a pleasant expression for the watching parents. I helped Jay secure his volcano in David's back seat while explaining to Mrs. Patterson, the concerned third-grade teacher who had approached, that we were simply having some scheduling difficulties. Nothing to worry about. Just working out the logistics of a busy week. David hadn't spoken a single word. He stood frozen beside his car, staring at Jay with an expression of raw panic. When Jay hugged him goodbye, David's arms barely moved to return the embrace. The other parents pretended not to notice, but their sideways glances and hushed conversations followed us as I guided Jay to my car. Ms. Martinez intercepted us before we could leave, her clipboard clutched against her chest. She explained that tomorrow's field trip to the Science Museum required a permission slip, but with our situation, protocol demanded both parents' signatures. Her eyes darted between David's car and mine, clearly uncomfortable with the tension radiating from both vehicles. She suggested whoever could help with tonight's science fair setup could sign the form then. The other parent could sign in the morning. It was a reasonable solution, delivered with the practiced diplomacy of a teacher who had navigated divorced parent situations before. I agreed immediately, knowing David was in no condition to help with anything tonight. As we drove away, I watched David in my rearview mirror. He still stood beside his car, keys dangling from his limp hand, looking lost in the school parking lot he'd visited hundreds of times before. Several parents had approached him, probably offering help or asking if he was all right. He didn't seem to register their presence. Jay chattered about his volcano during the drive home, explaining how the baking soda and vinegar reaction would create the perfect eruption. His enthusiasm filled the car, a stark contrast to the calculated destruction I'd set in motion. When he mentioned that Dad had promised to help him practice his presentation tonight, I assured him we'd make sure he was perfectly prepared. At home, I faced a choice. Patricia had texted 3 times asking about the pickup arrangements. David hadn't called her yet. I could race to Dr. Patel's old office, hoping to find some trace of Sarah's medical records before David thought to look there. Or I could maintain the facade of normalcy, help with the science fair, and let David's panic work in my favor. I chose normalcy. Stability mattered more than evidence right now, especially with the school community watching. I texted Patricia that David seemed unstable after our conversation, suggesting she might want to check on him. Then I helped Jay change into comfortable clothes and gather his presentation materials. The drive back to school for setup was filled with Jay's nervous excitement. He practiced his presentation in the back seat, stumbling over the scientific terms, but pushing through with determination. When we arrived at the gymnasium, other families were already arranging their projects on the assigned tables. The normal chaos of a school event felt surreal after the afternoon's confrontation. I threw myself into helping, arranging volcanoes and solar system models with enthusiastic efficiency. I chatted with other parents, helped younger siblings find the bathroom, and volunteered to run to the supply closet for extra extension cords. Every helpful action was witnessed, every interaction noted by the tight-knit school community. Patricia called while I was helping Jay position his volcano for optimal viewing. I let it go to voicemail. My lawyer texted about an emergency filing deadline. I ignored it. Jay's homework folder was missing from his backpack, probably left at David's office during yesterday's visit. These pressing matters piled up like the foam from Jay's practice eruption, but I focused solely on being the perfect, attentive mother. Ms. Martinez approached during cleanup, her expression carefully neutral. She mentioned that David had called the school office, sounding agitated and asking about pickup procedures. The secretary had been concerned enough to alert the principal. I expressed appropriate worry, suggesting that the stress of our separation was affecting him more than expected. By the time we finished setup, word had spread through the parent network. I heard fragments of conversations, saw the meaningful looks exchanged over children's heads. David's breakdown in the parking lot had become the evening's primary gossip. My calm, helpful presence at the science fair only amplified the contrast. At home, while I supervised Jay's bath time, my phone buzzed with notifications. A neighbor had posted on the community Facebook page about calling 911 for that poor widower having another breakdown. The EMT response to David's house was apparently visible from several yards. Comments poured in expressing concern, sharing previous observations of his struggles, and praising my strength in handling everything so well. Jay defended his father at bedtime, his small voice fierce with loyalty. He reminded me that Dad always read dinosaur books when I was too tired, that Dad knew all the best voices for each character. The observation stung with its truth. David had been a devoted father, whatever his failures as a husband. Jay's love for him was pure and uncomplicated, which made everything harder. After Jay fell asleep, I drove to Dr. Patel's former office. The building was dark, a small medical complex that had seen better days. The directory in the lobby showed that Dr. Patel had retired 18 months ago. The current women's health practice had no records from her patients, the young receptionist explained when I called their emergency line. They'd started fresh with new systems, new files. Any records from Dr. Patel's practice would have been transferred or destroyed according to state regulations. I sat in my car in the empty parking lot, processing this dead end. Without those medical records, proving anything about Sarah's death would be nearly impossible. But as I sat there, a patrol car cruised slowly through the lot, the officer clearly noting my presence. By tomorrow, there would be a record of me visiting this building at night, looking for David's car, as I'd explain if asked. The next morning brought new complications. The hospital records department explained that Sarah's medical files were sealed and would require a court order to access. Both David and I would need to file competing petitions, creating our first official legal battle. The clerk's sympathetic expression suggested she'd seen this scenario before, former spouses fighting over a deceased person's records. Patricia finally reached me while I was making Jay's breakfast. Her voice carried a strange note as she mentioned how my behavior reminded her of when my mother died. The comment seemed innocuous, but something in her tone suggested she was beginning to question the story I'd told about losing my best friend to a hammered driver. The foundation of lies I'd built was developing hairline cracks. The school mom group chat exploded with messages about David's breakdown. I crafted my responses carefully, expressing concern while subtly reinforcing the narrative of his instability. Each message was a small poison med, delivered with worried emoji and sympathetic words. By noon, the consensus was clear. David was struggling, possibly dangerously, and wasn't it wonderful that Jay had such a stable mother to rely on? My attempt to control the narrative backfired when I posted on Facebook, asking if anyone had experience with pregnancy complications. I'd hoped to gather information about Sarah's condition, but Claire screenshot the post and forwarded it to David's lawyer as evidence of my obsession with his deceased wife. The accusation stung because it was partially true. Another complication emerged when I tried to access Jay's medical records. Everything was under David's account, from vaccination records to insurance information. The payment still came from Sarah's old checking account, which David controlled. Without access to Jay's medical history, establishing myself as his primary caregiver would be more difficult. 3 nights without proper sleep had taken their toll. At school drop-off, I mixed up Jay's lunch medications in front of the school nurse. It was a minor error, quickly corrected, but the nurse's notation in her log would become part of the official record. Every mistake now carried weight I couldn't afford. Melissa cornered me at pickup, her expression torn between loyalty and self-preservation. She believed something was wrong with the whole situation, she said, but her husband had threatened to take their kids to his mother's if she got involved in our drama. Another family was already being affected by the waves spreading from our collision. She hugged me quickly before retreating to her minivan, choosing her own children over the truth. The neighborhood had begun treating us like pariahs. Neighbors crossed the street to avoid awkward encounters. I noticed Ring doorbell cameras turning to track my movements, and later saw discussions in the neighborhood watch group about the custody drama couple. Our private war had become public entertainment. David's lawyer made a clever move, claiming his client had mentioned the grief support group timeline in an old church bulletin. When checked, the dates aligned perfectly with his story, making him appear credible while casting doubt on my version of events. Each legal maneuver was a chess move in an increasingly complex game. Melissa's final defection came when she admitted she needed David's veterinary clinic for her diabetic cat's insulin prescriptions. He provided them at cost, a kindness that now bought her silence. Economics trumped truth, another reminder that justice was a luxury not everyone could afford. My small victory in proving David had lied about when he met Claire turned Pyrrhic, when it also revealed inconsistencies in my own timeline about Sarah's death. Being right made me look calculating rather than wronged. Another parent photographed my momentary smile of relief at finding evidence, later sharing it as proof that I was celebrating during a custody battle. The final blow came in a text from David. "Sarah was right about you. I should have listened." The message was brief but loaded with implication. Whatever Sarah had told him before her death, whatever doubts she'd expressed, he now believed them. We were both committed to mutual destruction. Two people who had once promised to heal each other now determined to inflict maximum damage. The science fair proceeded the next day with forced normalcy. Jay's volcano erupted perfectly, drawing applause from judges and parents alike. David arrived late, his appearance disheveled, but his determination clear. We stood on opposite sides of Jay's table, playing the role of supportive parents, while the tension between us created its own atmospheric pressure. As Jay accepted his participation ribbon with glowing pride, I caught David's eye across the gymnasium. The man who had sobbed and begged just days ago was gone, replaced by someone harder and more dangerous. We had moved beyond reconciliation, beyond forgiveness, into territory where only one of us could emerge with custody of the child we both claimed to love. The war for Jay had officially begun, and the casualties were already mounting. Claire appeared at my Tuesday morning yoga class 3 weeks later, rolling out her mat in the back corner with practiced ease. She moved through sun salutations with perfect form, her breathing controlled and steady. During the cool-down, she mentioned Mary Oliver's poetry while stretching, explaining how Sarah had introduced her to the poet years ago. The other women in class nodded sympathetically, unaware of the calculated nature of her presence. I maintained my warrior pose, muscles trembling with the effort of appearing unbothered. After class, Claire lingered by the water fountain, making small talk with the instructor about meditation retreats. Her Instagram stories later showed her coffee cup from the cafe next door, the same place I always stopped after yoga. The message was clear. She could insert herself into any part of my life. The custody evaluation began the following week. Jay met with the court-appointed psychologist for his intake interview, emerging from the office with red-rimmed eyes. In the car, he mentioned telling the doctor about the arguments he'd overheard, adding that mommy made daddy sad now too. His innocent observation would become ammunition in David's filing. David's next move was providing Sarah's laptop to a forensic analyst. He'd kept it untouched in their bedroom closet, preserving years of emails and browsing history. My old messages to Sarah surfaced in the analysis, documenting our friendship from the grief support group through her final weeks. The investigator flagged several exchanges as concerning regarding my level of attachment to her family. Security footage from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed me visiting Sarah the night before her death. The timestamp indicated I'd stayed for 47 minutes, arriving at 8:13 p.m. and leaving at 9 p.m. David's lawyer immediately filed this as evidence of my obsession with his deceased wife, while I scrambled to explain the innocent nature of the visit. The family court judge reviewed my claims about David's role in Sarah's death with visible skepticism. Without concrete evidence, my accusations were reframed as parental alienation. The ruling was swift and devastating. Supervised visitation only, with exchanges to occur at a neutral location. My time with Jay would now be monitored by a court-appointed supervisor who took notes on every interaction. I discovered Sarah's Facebook password saved in an old email and used it to prevent David from memorializing her page. Her last status update remained in drafts, never posted. Need to talk to someone about D. The ambiguous message could mean anything, but I kept the page active, a digital ghost under my control. Claire's therapy timeline revealed troubling patterns. Her Instagram stories showed she'd started counseling immediately after her miscarriage, but the date suggested she'd suspected something about Sarah's death even then. Her therapist's name appeared in tagged locations, the same practice that specialized in pregnancy loss and trauma. My own therapist, Dr. Kim, received a subpoena to testify about our sessions. The court order specifically requested information about any concerning statements regarding attachment to Jay. Therapist-patient privilege had limits when child custody was involved, and Dr. Kim's notes would become part of the official record. During a scheduled handoff, I attempted to record David on my phone, hoping to capture evidence of his instability. Jay spotted the device and asked loudly if I was making a movie. David smirked, warning me about recording laws in our state. The failed attempt would later appear in his lawyer's filing as evidence of my manipulative behavior. David weaponized the pickup schedule, knowing my work hours perfectly. School required collection by 3:15 p.m., but he scheduled all exchanges for 3 p.m., forcing me to leave work early or risk being late. Each tardy arrival was documented by the supervisor, building a pattern of unreliability in the court record. The nurse who'd attended Sarah's delivery worked at the same hospital where I'd volunteered. When approached about testifying, she mentioned her 3 children and nursing school loans, explaining she couldn't risk her job by getting involved. Her silence was purchased by necessity, another person choosing survival over truth. David had moved into the master bedroom of our house while I searched for an apartment. During a court-approved visit to collect belongings, I found Sarah's clothes still hanging in the closet. Her perfume bottles remained on the dresser, and the pillow on her side of the bed still carried her scent. He'd preserved their bedroom like a shrine while conducting his affair with Claire. An offer arrived through David's lawyer. Unsupervised visits would resume if I admitted Sarah's death was natural and ceased all accusations. The proposal was framed as being in Jay's best interest, prioritizing stability over conflict. My refusal was documented as choosing personal vendettas over my child's well-being. Hospital security footage revealed a critical error in my timeline. The entrance I remembered using was actually under construction that night. The footage showed me entering through a different door, changing my arrival time by 12 minutes. This discrepancy, while minor, cast doubt on my entire version of events. Sarah's pregnancy app data became the next battleground. Neither David nor I had known she'd been documenting her symptoms and fears digitally. The app was installed on an old tablet forgotten in a drawer, still logged into her account. Both legal teams raced to secure the device before the other party discovered its existence. The app revealed Sarah had gestational diabetes, explaining David's controlling behavior about her diet. What I'd interpreted as manipulation was reframed as concern for her health. The medical information complicated the narrative, showing layers of truth neither of us had fully understood. Patricia faced an impossible choice when David threatened to limit her access to Jay. She was forced to publicly support him while privately maintaining doubts about Sarah's death. Her decision to choose Jay over justice was pragmatic but painful, another casualty in our war. I began orchestrating encounters with David's veterinary clients, striking up conversations at the grocery store or gym. Casual mentions of the difficult situation planted seeds of doubt about his character. Several clients quietly switched practices, eroding his professional reputation through whispered concerns. Claire's Instagram location tags led me to the farmer's market where she met with another woman from our old grief support group. I approached with forced casualness, making small talk while photographing their interaction. The woman's presence suggested Claire was building her own network of support and possibly evidence. Sarah's pregnancy app was recovered from the tablet before David realized it existed. The data showed escalating anxiety in her final weeks, with entries about feeling trapped and afraid. Her documentation provided the first real evidence supporting my claims, though it stopped short of explicitly naming David as a threat. David's lawyer filed a motion claiming I'd had an affair during our marriage, twisting an innocent friendship with a co-worker into something salacious. The accusation forced me to defend myself against baseless claims, draining time and resources from the real issues. The strategy was transparent but effective. Fighting the false affair allegation caused me to miss Jay's therapy appointment. The absence was noted as non-compliant parent behavior in the court record. Each missed appointment or late arrival accumulated into a pattern of unreliability that David's team exploited ruthlessly. Legal fees drained my savings while David accessed our joint accounts still frozen pending division. The financial imbalance affected every aspect of the case, from expert witnesses to document preparation. Justice, I learned, was expensive and favored those with deeper pockets. A confrontation at Sarah's favorite Italian restaurant created new complications. The owner, who'd loved Sarah like a daughter, was traumatized by our public argument about her death. His request that we never return turn was another relationship destroyed by our conflict, another piece of Sarah's world we'd corrupted. My principal called about complaints regarding my classroom performance. David's friend had been hired as my teaching assistant, creating a hostile work environment. Parents noticed the tension, and my professional reputation suffered as personal drama bled into my career. Sleeping in my car outside Jay's school became routine while David occupied our house. Security guards noted my presence, adding to the narrative of instability his lawyer was constructing. The physical toll of homelessness affected every aspect of my fight for custody. Robert's plea to let Sarah rest came during a chance encounter at the cemetery. His words carried the weight of a grieving father's exhaustion. The accusation that I was torturing them all hit harder than any legal filing, forcing me to confront the collateral damage of my pursuit. Ms. Martinez's suspension came after a forged reference letter surfaced in court records. She'd written a genuine recommendation for David months earlier, but someone had altered it to include damaging information about me. Her daughter's tears when asking why mommy was crying became another weight on my conscience. The Martinez family faced separation when her husband couldn't handle the stress of her job loss. Their stable life unraveled because of their proximity to our conflict. Watching their family fracture while fighting for my own created a sickening parallel I couldn't ignore. Despite knowing the investigation was destroying innocent lives, I pushed forward. The principal contacted me about concerned parents, the school board was asking questions, and Jay's classmates were being affected by the drama. Still, I continued gathering evidence, prioritizing my goal over the widening circle of damage. Melissa's question at our coffee meeting hung in the air for 13 long seconds. Her simple query about whether I might be wrong about everything exposed the doubt I'd been suppressing. My inability to answer immediately revealed more than any confession could have. Admitting in court that I'd lied about losing my best friend to a hammered driver shattered my credibility. The fabrication, designed to gain David's trust initially, now painted me as a master manipulator. Every truth I'd told was tainted by this original deception. Sarah's pregnancy app revealed 3 unanswered texts about cramping the night before her death. My phone had been on silent during a movie, and I hadn't seen the messages until morning. The timestamp showed she'd reached out during her final hours while I'd been unavailable, adding guilt to my growing burden. David's lawyer filed an emergency motion to advance the custody hearing, citing my parental instability. My own attorney was vacationing in Bermuda, leaving me scrambling for representation. The accelerated timeline favored David's prepared team over my disrupted defense. Understanding David's motivation didn't excuse his actions, but made them disturbingly human. He genuinely believed he deserved a real family, after years of Sarah's depression and distance. His entitlement was wrong but comprehensible, driven by grief and loneliness rather than pure malice. The mix of genuine grief for Sarah and desperate need to be Jay's only parent revealed the complexity of David's psychology. He wasn't a monster but a damaged person making terrible choices. This recognition made fighting him both harder and more necessary. Violating Sarah's dying wish about keeping peace felt like another betrayal. She'd asked me to take care of her boys, to help them heal. Instead, I was tearing apart what remained of their family in pursuit of justice she might not have wanted. My empathy died slowly as I learned to manipulate the system like David did. Each strategic move required suppressing my former self, the woman who genuinely wanted to help a grieving family. That person was a casualty of this war, replaced by someone harder and more calculating. Evidence came through befriending Claire's book club friend during her divorce. I exploited her vulnerability, offering support while gathering information about Claire's relationship with David. Using another woman's pain for my own purposes marked a new low in my transformation. Proving David had lied about his timeline felt hollow when I saw him at Sarah's grave. We'd both brought yellow roses, her favorite, approaching from opposite directions like dancers in a tragic ballet. His tears were real, his grief genuine despite his guilt. Victory tasted like ash. David's counterclaim gained traction as more people saw me as the true manipulator. The narrative shifted from grieving stepmother to calculating infiltrator who targeted a vulnerable family. Public opinion, once firmly in my corner, began to fracture and shift. Everything hinged on Sharon's testimony about Sarah's final hour. The delivery nurse held the truth about medication timing and medical decisions. Her knowledge could vindicate my suspicions or destroy them completely. The pressure on her to speak grew from all sides. My past donation to the hospital charity gala created unexpected leverage. Sharon's son had benefited from the scholarship fund, his name on the donor recognition wall. The connection was coincidental but useful, adding another layer of obligation to her silence. Hospital colleagues divided into camps based on shift preferences and vacation schedules. Those who supported David received better assignments, while my allies found themselves working holidays. The workplace became a battlefield where patient care suffered from staff divisions. The judge's explanation about burden of proof was a reality check. Suspicion alone wouldn't change custody arrangements. Without concrete evidence of wrongdoing, the court would maintain status quo. My accusations needed substantiation beyond emotional certainty. Contacting Sarah's college roommate meant calling in old debts. Anna owed Sarah for keeping quiet about an accident junior year that could have derailed her medical career. Now I needed her to break that same silence, betraying Sarah's trust posthumously. Anna provided partial medical records but refused to testify about Sarah's college struggles with addiction. The documents hinted at pre-existing conditions that made pregnancy dangerous, but without testimony, their impact was limited. Another ally chose self-preservation over truth. The medical records Anna provided contained a bombshell I hadn't expected. Sarah's pre-existing condition wasn't just dangerous for pregnancy. She'd been explicitly warned against conceiving. The documentation showed 3 separate consultations where specialists had outlined the risks. She'd signed acknowledgement forms understanding the potential complications. This This discovery forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. Sarah had chosen to get pregnant knowing the risks. She'd made that decision while already suspecting David's affair, based on dates in her pregnancy app. The timeline suggested she'd been gathering evidence for her own custody battle, using the pregnancy as leverage. My hands shook as I cross-referenced the medical consultations with her app entries. Sarah had started documenting David's absences and suspicious behavior 2 months before conceiving. She'd been building a case just like I was now. The parallel made my stomach turn. I drove to the storage unit where I'd hidden copies of all my evidence. Inside the climate-controlled space, banker's boxes lined the walls, each labeled with dates and contents. I pulled out the box containing Sarah's social media screenshots and began matching them to her medical timeline. The pattern emerged slowly. Sarah had scheduled her fertility treatments around David's business trips, ensuring he'd be present for conception, but absent for most appointments. She'd been creating a paper trail of neglect, while simultaneously putting her life at risk. The calculated nature of her actions mirrored my own 4-year performance. My phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. The emergency hearing had been scheduled for next week. David's team had successfully fast-tracked the custody evaluation based on my erratic behavior and obsessive investigation. I had 6 days to prepare a defense that wouldn't rely on conspiracy theories about Sarah's death. I spent the next 72 hours barely sleeping, organizing evidence into a coherent narrative. The challenge was presenting facts without appearing unhinged. Every document needed context. Every timeline required corroboration. I created charts showing David's pattern of deception without mentioning my suspicions about Sarah's death. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While searching through Sarah's Gmail drafts on the tablet, I found emails she'd never sent. Dozens of messages addressed to Patricia, to her doctor, to a lawyer she'd never hired. Each draft was time-stamped, creating a digital diary of her final months. One draft, dated 2 weeks before her death, outlined her entire plan. She'd discovered David's affair through a credit card statement and decided to secure Jay's future by having another child. The pregnancy would make leaving harder for David, give her leverage in court, and ensure Jay had a sibling if something happened to her. That last line stopped me cold. Sarah had known the risks weren't just statistical. She'd been experiencing symptoms for weeks before seeking treatment, according to her unsent emails. She'd delayed care to establish David's pattern of absence, prioritizing evidence over her own health. I printed every draft, my hands steady despite the magnitude of what I'd discovered. Sarah hadn't been murdered. She'd been playing a dangerous game with her own life as the stakes. The tragedy was even worse than I'd imagined. 2 parents so focused on winning custody that they'd lost sight of everything else. The storage unit felt suffocating as I packed the printed emails into a new box. These documents would change everything at the hearing, but not in the way I'd originally intended. They showed Sarah as a complex person making desperate choices, not a victim of David's malice. Sharon finally agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near the hospital. She arrived in scrubs, clearly on a break, her expression guarded. I slid Sarah's printed drafts across the table, watching her face change as she read. Her coffee grew cold as she absorbed the implications. She confirmed what the emails suggested. Sarah had arrived at the hospital later than recommended, her condition already critical. The medical team had done everything possible, but Sarah had waited too long to seek help. Sharon's testimony wouldn't prove murder. It would reveal a tragedy of misplaced priorities. David's deposition was scheduled for the day before our hearing. I watched through the glass partition as his lawyer prepared him, noting his nervous habits. He kept touching his wedding ring, the same gesture Sarah had described in her drafts, the unconscious tell that revealed his guilt about the affair. During the deposition, I presented Sarah's emails methodically. David's face crumbled as he read his wife's words, understanding for the first time that she'd known about Claire all along. His tears were genuine as he realized Sarah had risked everything for leverage in a custody battle that never happened. His admission came in broken phrases. He'd been planning to leave Sarah for Claire but couldn't abandon Jay. The affair had been his escape from a marriage that felt like a tomb. He'd never wanted Sarah to die, had begged her to see the doctor sooner when she'd mentioned feeling unwell. She'd refused, claiming she was fine. The court reporter captured every word as David described their final argument. Sarah had confronted him about Claire the night before her death, using her pregnancy as a weapon. She'd threatened to take Jay away, to destroy his veterinary practice, to ensure he never saw his son again. He'd stormed out, spending the night at Claire's apartment. By morning, Sarah was in distress. She'd called him repeatedly, but he'd ignored her, assuming it was more manipulation. When he finally answered, she was already at the hospital. He'd arrived to find her in critical condition, their unborn child already lost. His last words to her had been in anger. The truth was messier than murder, more painful than conspiracy. 2 people had destroyed each other through perfectly legal means, leaving Jay orphaned by their mutual selfishness. David's guilt wasn't criminal, but it was real. He'd live with those ignored calls forever. The hearing arrived with unexpected media attention. Someone had leaked details about our custody battle, drawing local reporters to the courthouse. I avoided them, focusing on presenting my evidence calmly and rationally. The truth would speak louder than sensational claims. In court, I presented Sarah's timeline without editorializing. Her emails showed a woman making calculated choices, not a victim of abuse. David's lawyer couldn't dispute the documents, especially after his client's deposition admissions. The narrative shifted from murder to mutual destruction. The judge ordered a recess after reviewing the evidence. In the hallway, Patricia approached me, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd read Sarah's emails, understood finally what her daughter had been planning. Her tears were for the granddaughter who died in a war between parents, not from medical complications alone. When court resumed, the judge's ruling was measured. David would face investigation for potential negligence in not responding to Sarah's calls, though criminal charges were unlikely. The focus shifted to Jay's welfare, to determining which parent could provide stability after such devastating revelations. The custody evaluator testified about Jay's sessions. The child was struggling with loyalty conflicts, torn between two parents he loved. He'd shown signs of anxiety, regression in school performance, and sleep disturbances. The ongoing conflict was damaging him more than any single-parent household would. My testimony focused on Jay's daily needs, his routines, his emotional well-being. I presented records of school involvement, medical appointments attended, extracurricular activities supported, the mundane details of parenting that mattered more than dramatic revelations about the past. David's testimony revealed his own dedication. Despite his failures as a husband, he knew Jay's teachers, his friends' names, his favorite books. He'd been present for milestones, even during his affair. His love for Jay was genuine, complicated by guilt, but not diminished by it. The judge's final ruling split custody differently than either of us had requested. Primary physical custody went to me, with David receiving significant visitation. More importantly, we were both ordered into co-parenting counseling. Mandatory sessions focused on Jay's needs rather than our grievances. Financial arrangements were settled equitably. David would pay child support based on standard calculations, not punitive amounts. The house would be sold, proceeds divided according to our contributions. Sarah's life insurance would go into a trust for Jay's education, practical solutions to practical problems. The most significant ruling concerned our conduct going forward. Any attempts to alienate Jay from either parent would result in custody modification. We were prohibited from discussing Sarah's death with Jay until he was older, and then only with a therapist's guidance. The court prioritized Jay's healing over our need for vindication. Outside the courthouse, David and I stood awkwardly while our lawyers discussed logistics. The war was over, but peace felt fragile. We'd both lost more than we'd gained, destroyed relationships and reputations in pursuit of victory. Jay was the only winner, if protective court orders could be called winning. Claire had disappeared from David's life during the proceedings, unwilling to weather the scandal. His veterinary practice had suffered but survived. He'd moved to a small apartment near the old house, maintaining stability for Jay's sake. The man who'd betrayed his dying wife was trying to become the father his son needed. I enrolled Jay in therapy immediately, finding a specialist in childhood trauma. His sessions became the cornerstone of our new routine. Homework, dinner, bath time, the rhythms of normal life slowly returning. My focus shifted from proving David's guilt to proving myself as a mother. The school community gradually accepted our new normal. Play dates resumed, birthday party invitations arrived. Some parents remained distant, but others offered support. Ms. Martinez returned to work after her suspension was lifted, her marriage surviving the strain. Small victories in the wreckage. 6 months after the ruling, Jay had his first overnight with David without incident. He returned happy, chattering about their breakfast pancakes and trip to the zoo. The normality of it felt surreal after everything we'd put him through. Progress came in these tiny moments. Co-parenting counseling forced David and me to communicate civilly. We learned to separate our history from Jay's needs, to make decisions based on his welfare rather than our resentment. The therapist guided us through creating consistent rules, coordinating schedules, presenting a united front despite our division. A year later, I watched Jay play at the park while David pushed him on the swings. We'd achieved a functional relationship built on Jay's laughter rather than our pain. Sarah's death would always shadow us, but we'd learned to live with ghosts. Jay was thriving, and that mattered more than justice or revenge.